AM-25 of Aeromexico took off from Mexico City at 8 a.m. local time. The journey was nearly 10 hours long, stretching across half the globe toward Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, where autumn had already arrived with unpredictable winds and thick fog. Above the clouds, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner soared silently like a great silver bird. But inside the aircraft, a story no one had anticipated was quietly unfolding. Captain Alina Ramires, 41, a seasoned pilot and the pride of Aeromexico, sat at the controls. She was a force in the skies, having flown through 3 Atlantic storms, completed an emergency landing in San Salvador after cabin depressurization, and once saved 276 passengers from an engine failure. But this time, the challenge didn't come from turbulence or failing systems. It came from a fading heartbeat in seat 3D 25 minutes before landing. As the aircraft began its descent into Dutch airspace, the head flight attendant burst into the cockpit, pale and shaken. A male passenger around 60 showing signs of a possible stroke. "We have a doctor on board, it's critical. We need to land immediately." Alina didn't speak. She knew the drill. Aircraft were assigned precise landing slots. Schiphol was one of the busiest airports in Europe. An unscheduled emergency approach would cause a ripple effect across dozens of flights. But 20 minutes in the air could mean death for a stroke victim. She clicked on the radio. "Amsterdam Tower, this is AM-25 declaring medical emergency. We request immediate landing clearance on runway 18R. We are on short final. AM-25, we currently have traffic ahead on approach. Can you hold for 12 minutes? Alina pressed her mic again. Her voice was firm, negative, patient in critical condition, requesting emergency priority. The cockpit felt like it was holding its breath. 3 seconds passed. Then came the answer from the tower, calm and direct. AM-25, cleared to land runway 18R, emergency services will be ready. Her first officer, Miguel, nodded silently. Alina eased the nose downward, bringing the Dreamliner into final approach. Her grip on the yoke was steady, her eyes glued to the navigation panel. In the cabin, the passengers had been informed. Some prayed, some sat in silence. And in the business class aisle, a doctor pressed 2 fingers to a nearly still pulse, watching the man in 3D go pale. His name was Daniel Ortega, a renowned physicist en route to an energy sustainability conference in Copenhagen. His briefcase held data that could shift Europe's next decade of energy policy. But here, at 3,000 feet, all the conferences and policies in the world meant nothing if his heart stopped. The Dreamliner banked slightly. The ground appeared wet and gray. The wind turbine stood still. The runway lights shone ahead. Alina made a few final adjustments, gentle, precise, surgical. When the wheels kissed the runway with a firm thud, the cabin didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. The aircraft rolled to a stop. The doors opened, paramedics rushed aboard. Alina didn't leave the cockpit, but she watched through the internal monitors. The medical team surrounded Ortega. They were administering defibrillation. 5 minutes, 7 minutes, then the doctor raised a hand, heartbeats back, he's alive. Alina exhaled slowly, finally leaning back against her seat. A single tear slid down her cheek. Somewhere behind her, a quiet sob broke the stillness. An elderly Dutch woman in seat 12C looked up toward the cockpit and nodded. No words, just deep, grateful acknowledgement. Aftermath. 3 days later, Daniel Ortega awoke in the ICU at Amsterdam UMC. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You're in the Netherlands, Professor," the nurse smiled. "Thanks to a brave woman who refused to wait." "Hello, passenger." "No," she said, "you're pilot. She landed you in record time, without a slot, against protocol, just to save your life." A month later, Alina received a small envelope at Aeromexico headquarters. Inside was a handwritten letter, "Dear Alina, I don't know how to thank you. I used to think my life was built around formulas, theories, and keynote speeches. But you reminded me that sometimes it's not knowledge or calculation that saves us. It's a decision made in the clouds in seconds by someone who refuses to wait. Thank you for choosing to act. Daniel Ortega." Alina folded the letter and placed it in her flight log journal, next to another note she had saved for years. "First day as captain, Mom and Dad cried." In aviation, every decision is trained, calculated, and checked. But up in the sky, some choices don't come from manuals. Some decisions are made in the space between heartbeats. Flight AM-25 didn't just carry passengers from Mexico to the Netherlands. It carried a man back from the brink. And it reminded the world that up in the clouds, courage is often the only thing keeping us tethered to life. The Iberia Airbus A330, flight IB347 from Madrid to Frankfurt was on final approach. The sky was gray, the wind relentless, typical for a late autumn day in Germany, but something felt different. Tense, unsettled. Captain Lucia Serrano, 39, the first woman ever appointed as a long-haul training supervisor at Iberia, sat in the cockpit with eyes locked on the radar. Beside her sat First Officer Mateo Ruiz, 32, confident, capable, but facing his first real crosswind landing in a wide-body jet. Frankfurt Tower, this is IB347. We're on final for runway 27R, getting wind shear alerts from the onboard system. Please confirm. A moment of static, then came the response, calm but clinical. IB347 confirmed wind shear gusting at 22 knots from southwest. Previous 2 aircraft diverted to 25L. What's your call? Lucia glanced at Mateo, then at the fuel gauge. 22 minutes of holding fuel, not enough to circle long or change runways. She didn't flinch. We'll proceed with 27R. Under 1,000 feet, the aircraft shook gently with the turbulence. The wind was shifting erratically. Mateo gripped the yoke tighter, sweat forming beneath his gloves. Part of him wanted to hand the controls over to Lucia. She had over 10,000 flight hours and 3 emergency landings under her belt, but he also knew. If he didn't face this now, he'd never command from the left seat. Lucia said nothing. She simply placed her hand gently on his shoulder. It was wordless but clear, "I trust you." In the cabin, a young man clutched a small velvet box in his lap, an engagement ring he planned to offer at the arrival's gate. An elderly woman, flying outside Spain for the first time in 12 years to see her daughter, gripped the armrest with trembling fingers, lips moving silently in prayer. Each person on board had a story, a hope, a reason, and they had all placed their lives in the hands of this flight deck. The wheels touched down, a soft thud, followed by the signature puffs of smoke curling from the tires. Mateo held the centerline, auto brakes engaged. Then, warning nose gear steering failure, Lucia instantly took over. "Hold the line, do not let it drift," she barked, focused like a surgeon. The plane swayed slightly to the right but stabilized. On the tarmac, ground crews froze as emergency response units stood by. And then, slowly, gracefully, the A330 rolled off the active runway and came to a stop at the gate. In the tower, the controllers applauded, something they rarely did. Mateo exhaled deeply. Hands still trembling, he looked at Lucia. "Thank you for letting me try." Lucia just smiled. "You'll never fly your own sky if you can't face the wind." Every flight carries more than passengers. It carries fears, dreams, regrets, hopes. In the sky, hesitation is dangerous. But trust in your crew, your training, and yourself can turn a storm into a landing. Sometimes the runway isn't just a piece of asphalt. It's a test of who you really are.